you brought your Bible today, you're welcome to turn to the book of Revelation. We'll be jumping around just a little bit here today, and we're continuing a series on prophecy. This isn't always a really popular series. It's either really popular with someone or something that others really just don't like. They just don't want to know about. So I kind of get the divide. 2 weeks ago, we started this series, and actually I was surprised by how many people came up to me afterwards and just were so excited to understand the times in which we live. This is why this is important. This is why I chose this subject, is because it shows kind of where things are heading in this world and kind of where we're at and how things are happening even now behind the scenes that are fulfilling some of that Bible prophecy, leading us towards greater fulfillment. And so I'm doing an acronym once again. I won't give you the full acronym today, but it's the words end times. And so the E and end, we're going to start off with we started off with 2 weeks ago with kind of an event timeline. We just kind of got a general overview of God's plan for the history of this world. So the second point in this acronym, N, is for nations in prophecy. I'm going to have to break this up into a couple weeks. I just couldn't do justice to it. And I got to be honest with you, I'm going to probably get in some trouble for this message. There's only one way that I could logically conceive of doing this, and that is that as we're looking to explain the very dark future that awaits this world, is to go back into the past and look at a time in our history when that future period of 7 years, the tribulation, was foreshadowed for us in the Old Testament. And then we're going to look at how there is a thread that ties going all the way back to the Old Testament, all the way through history and time to those future events. As we gaze over this landscape of time, we're really looking at the deepest and darkest valley that runs through the whole of history. Many pastors know the things that I'm going to share with you today, but many, many pastors will not preach on these subjects for one simple reason. They really like their job, and they'd like to keep their job. This is probably the absolute worst time I could be doing a message like this because I'm facing my yearly pastoral review evaluation. So, if I'm not here next week, it's been good knowing you. It's been great being your pastor. The reason why, that pastors typically won't is because for three reasons. One, we know there are many people who don't really want to know some of the things that I'm going to share with you today. There are many who aren't going to like it, and there are some who are just plain out not going to believe it. Essentially, what this requires me to do is to divulge an alternative history, an alternate history, one in which you've likely never heard. And if you've never heard it, I already know your reaction because it was my reaction. About a decade ago, I was in a video rental store back when they had those, and I was the only one in the store, and I'm renting some DVDs, and the girl behind the counter was a young lady, and she started talking to me about things that are happening behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And she kept me captive there. I mean, literally, she was not going to let me leave. She had told me everything. Store, and I got home and I told my wife, from now on, you're going to that place, you're going to rent the movies because that lady is nuts. She is crazy. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13 tells us that it is folly to answer before we've heard. So I'm going to share some things with you today, and I'll kind of tie that in with something Einstein once said, that condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. It is easy to condemn things that we've never heard before because it sounds just impossible. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. So today what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk to you about anything conspiracy theory. And I've very purposefully and carefully gone through any information that is viable by you. Look it up for yourselves to find out that as I share these things with you, and I'm going to share quotes from people that I believe that you will trust very much to explain some things in history. No, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy plain and simple. There is a global conspiracy, and we as Christians should not be surprised. And who is the great conspirator? The one who conspires? Well, that would be the devil himself. And so at the very outset, I think I can get you to agree on this one thing, and that is that wherever God is doing a work, Satan is doing a counter work. Do you agree? And do you agree that wherever God is building his kingdom, Satan is trying to infiltrate and build his own? And that is really the foundation of what I'm going to share with you today. The enemy is presented as the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the sons of disobedience. And Satan, he has a very powerful ally in this world, and that is in the heart, the human nature of humanity, that fallen nature. Jesus himself went as far as to say in John chapter 8, verse 4, speaking to men who were religious, he said, "You are of your father, the devil." You will do. In other words, you're going to do the very thing he wants you to do. He was a liar, he was a murderer, and they proved to be just that in the life of Jesus. Not only were they untruthful about Jesus, but they also murdered him in the end, took his life. Now, when you want to understand Satan's agenda, you don't have to look very far into the book of Genesis to see Satan's working. And from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, where God created something beautiful, we have this subversion of the enemy infiltrating the garden and offering kind of an alternate path for humanity. But if you really want to understand Satan's working to build his kingdom, you can go till after the flood, just shortly after, and what you find Satan building his ideal kingdom of darkness. God had said after the flood to Noah and his family, "Be fruitful and multiply and spread over the face of the earth." Well, there was a man a few generations removed from Noah. His name was Nimrod. You may have read of him. He was the mighty hunter before the Lord. It probably should be translated a mighty hunter against the Lord. He was a mighty hunter of men's souls. He defied God, the directive to multiply and spread out, and what he did is he brought everyone together. And he decided that they would have a one world little system, a political system, a religious system, and that they would build this tower that would reach to the heavens. We know, of course, that is the Tower of Babel, a one world order. He was also the founder, by the way, of Babylon in Assyria. But that was the kind of an age of humanism, mankind coming together to do something in defiance of God, to do it in their own strength and power. And this satanically inspired man, Nimrod, he was used of the enemy, of the devil, to start implementing this kingdom. He's kind of the Old Testament version of the Antichrist. He was a man of sin. He was lawless. There are many similarities between him and the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. What many don't realize is that Babel, which is the Hebrew word for Babylon, is a template. And we find that template ultimately repatterned in the book of Revelation, where we again are confronted with Babylon. And in this case, in the future, there will be a time, a one world government that it unites politics and religion, and one man stands at the head of it who is Satan's man, and he's conspiring to bring men into false worship. What was the religious system of Babel? Well, the story goes that Nimrod, after the death of his father Cush, married his own mother, Semiramis, which is pretty gross. He married his own mother. Eventually, he died. And when he died, instead of Semiramis saying that Nimrod has died, she rather deified him and told the people that he hadn't died, he had ascended and become one with the sun, and that he is now the sun god. Around that time, shortly after his death, Semiramis was pregnant. Circumstances were suspicious, and she claimed that she was in fact a virgin, and that a beam of the sun from her ascended husband had come down and landed on her and impregnated her. And so she had this child, and his name was Tammuz. She claimed that Tammuz was the reincarnation of her husband. He too, by the way, died at the age of 40 in the famous mourning that took place of Semiramis for 40 days, one day for each year of his life, where she mourned, which supposedly, and this is all mythology, many of these things are true, but the myth is that after 40 days, she claimed that he rose again, that he was resurrected. I find this fascinating. A sun god, a virgin mother, queen of heaven, has a son who shares the nature of his father who died and rose again. Does that sound familiar to you? You know, one of the things you're going to find out about Satan and his building of his kingdom is he's not very original in his ideas. He's a great counterfeiter. He's an imitator. So this is the beginning of worship, which we find throughout the Old Testament, the worship of Baal. Baal is the sun god. It is another name for Nimrod. Semiramis would later be known as the moon goddess. This religion, this very pagan religion, was a mystery religion founded around the ideas of secret knowledge, where a person could ascend higher up in the ranks and understand the deeper mysteries. But the reason this is very important is because all paganism throughout history goes back to the Tower of Babel. It is the starting point of paganism. And it's interesting, in Ezekiel chapter 8, verses 14 through 16, we see that even the Jewish people, this was God who took Ezekiel out and showed him various things in the land, and he showed them women who, it says, were weeping over Tammuz, observing those 40 days of lamenting over Tammuz and his death. It was very pagan. And then he took him to the temple, and out on the threshold were men looking towards the east, worshiping the sun. So this is a very popular religion that had spread throughout the world into the days of Ezekiel. But if you go back to Babel, remember, how did God punish those at the Tower of Babel? What did God do? He confused their language. He scattered the people. Those people went to various places in the world, started different cultures, and they continue to worship, and oftentimes using different names for Semiramis and Nimrod, Baal and Ashtaroth, and many others, but they're all referring back to the same God and goddess, and of course that's a little g God. I'm going to talk to you in a few moments about an event that drove paganism underground in this world. So paganism was very public, very open for thousands of years, but something happened a little over 1,500 years ago that drove it behind the curtain. And I'm going to share what that was in just a moment. But I want to look at the political movement. So we've got the religious kind of celebration and worship of Babel. But I want to see how, in the flow of history, you have this false religion, this paganism, intertwined with the empires of this world. In order to do that, in the book of Daniel, in chapter 2, it talks about, there's a lot of things in Daniel that show us the future, but one of them, in chapter 2, is an image that came to King Nebuchadnezzar in a dream. And you might remember the image of this statue, and I don't have time to read all this. It's a lengthy section of scripture. I'll read some of it, but essentially what it was, he sees this statue, and the head is made of gold, the chest is made of silver, the belly and the thighs of bronze, and then the legs of iron. And this was very significant to him. He wanted to understand it. And so Daniel comes to him and tells him that what God has shown him is the flow of the political empires from that time forward all the way to the very end when Jesus Christ comes back. Gives him the whole layout of history. And this is incredible because this was one of the greatest evidences of the Bible, among many others, that God predicted the rise and fall of empires that happened exactly as God said. So Babylon was the head of gold. Medo-Persia came in and defeated the Babylonians. They were the chest and arms of silver, the Greeks, the belly and the thighs of brass. And then you have Rome, the legs of iron. And I want to read about this in Daniel chapter 2, verse 40. It says, there was a fourth kingdom, he's talking about Rome, as strong as iron, insomuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, it was a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, as much as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron, partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So this is very significant as he really divulges more about the fourth kingdom than the others that he explains. And this is significant in history. When you look back to the Roman Empire, what you find is that the Roman Empire, is depicted here as the legs, divided in 395 AD. So that you have Rome, you had Western and Eastern Rome, Western controlled from Rome, Eastern from Constantinople. When you get to the end of this structure, you get to the feet, and it says it's legs of iron become feet that are mixed with clay and iron. And that signifies that at the very end, before Jesus comes back, there will be a revived Roman Empire, but it won't look quite the same as the previous in that there's an admixture there. And I would just propose to you today that the Roman Empire was never defeated as the others were. It just kind of dissolved through their debauchery, their debt, and all these other problems they had. And the culture of Rome can be found in many cultures, especially over in Europe. So it will retain many of the similarities of the Roman culture. But you see that ultimately these feet come to the 10 toes, and I'll tell you the significance of that in a moment. But let me read on. I just finished at verse 43. Verse 44 says that in the days of those kings, so he's talking about when the feet arrive with the 10 toes, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to those kingdoms. Inasmuch as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the great God has made known the king what will take place in the future. And there he is talking about Jesus, who is the smiting stone, who comes back at a time when that kingdom, when we see those 10 toes, and I'll explain, and it says he crushes them. So this is evidence that there will be a revived Roman Empire. It will be more clear as we get closer to the end. But let me just jump to the future now, and let me talk about this revived empire, and this is going to be evident during a period of 7 years, which we call the tribulation. And in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, let me talk about the politics of what's coming, and then I'll go back and talk a little bit about the religion. But in Revelation 13, verse 1, it says, "The dragon stood on the sand of the seashore, and behold, I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on the horns were 10 diadems, and on the heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and the feet of which like a bear, his mouth like the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority." And by the way, the dragon there in other places in Revelation was very clear that that is the devil himself who gives this beast. This is another name for the Antichrist. Remember, there are 25 different designations in the Bible for the Antichrist. He is here called the beast. And it says he has 10 horns, but then it explains in verse 12 what those 10 horns are. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they've received authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So in other words, when you get to the end of that statue with 10 toes, we're given further clarity in the book of Revelation that in the very end, centralized over there in Europe somewhere, there will be primarily 10 powers. That's the 10 toes. And it says here that here depicted as horns. And what is a horn but power? It's how an animal is able to exert its strength is through those horns. And it's saying here that this Antichrist will have the authority and the power of these 10 nations behind him, or whatever they are, nations, powers, whatever you want to call them. He wields that power. In 13, verse 3 of Revelation, I saw one of his heads, speaking of the Antichrist, as if it had been slain, his wound was healed. And get this, the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And I'm pointing this out again because this is a one world government. This is globalism, and this man stands at the head of it. The whole world followed him. And they worshiped the dragon because he gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to wage war with him?" This man is going to set up the abomination of desolation 3.5 years into the period of tribulation. His ambition will not only be political, but it will be religious. He will want to be worshipped. And of course, this is Satan's man, the embodiment of Satan himself. It says in verse 6 that he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. In other words, this man, like Nimrod before him, defies God. Now, verse 11 of chapter 13 introduces us to another individual. He said, "I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed." Now, this is a reference to the false prophet. So in the end times, you really have, again, an imitation, counterfeit by the enemy, this false satanic trinity. You have Satan, who stands at the head behind the scenes, and he has his man, that's really the son of perdition. He's the son of the devil, you might say, this Antichrist figure. But then they have also this prophet who acts very much like the Spirit of God, who promotes the other two. And so you have this satanic trinity that exists. These 2 men consolidate power through the use of politics and religion. So it's a one world political religious system. We get a glimpse of that system in Revelation chapter 17, verse 1. I saw one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." Now, in Revelation chapter 12, it spoke of a woman who was symbolic for Israel. Here we find another woman called the great harlot, and this is symbolic of false religion. And we see in verse 2 that the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. He carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on the scarlet beast full of blasphemous names and 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple, scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones, pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and the unclean things of her immorality. So we have a picture of this false religion that exists in the end times. This is where everything is heading, and this is why this message is very important, because we can see it today, and I'll show you where to look. It says she sits upon many waters. The waters there represent the nations, just as the Antichrist says it came out of the sea, came out of the waters, came out of the nations. And these kings are involved in her immorality. You know, the Bible often depicts spiritual unfaithfulness to God as spiritual adultery, spiritual harlotry. And this is what we find of the worship of the end times. Not only was it spiritualized, but it is literal. In Revelation 9:20, the rest of mankind who were not killed by the plagues did not repent of their works of their hands. So listen to this description of their worship. Nor of their worship of demons, idols of gold, silver, and brass, and of stone and of wood, which neither see, nor hear, nor walk. They do not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their immorality, nor of their thefts. This religion to come is very much like the mystery religions of old, filled with all kinds of immorality. It says here that the woman rides the beast. So you have this religious authority. This woman exploits the authority of the Antichrist. This religion is forced upon the world, just as in the Old Testament. You had Semiramis, who exploited the political power and authority of her husband, even after he had died, and she pushed that paganism upon her world in her day. Verse 6 talks about the violence coming in the future. Verse 6, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the witness of Christ. I saw her, I wondered greatly. Now, there are some identifiers that help us to possibly identify this false religion. In verse 4, it talked about the purple and the scarlet. There happens to be a religion where those colors are used within the hierarchy of their leadership. You have the decadence in wealth. It says she's adorned with gold and precious stones and all these other things. And there is a religion today that is very wealthy. In fact, so wealthy it has its own banking system. In verses 7 and 9, we have perhaps one of the greatest indications of what he's talking about. The angel said, "Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. Here is the mind which has wisdom, that the 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits." Where are there 7 mountains, 7 hills? It's in Rome. And this is, of course, the revived Roman Empire, so it makes sense. And so sitting there upon Rome, and there happens to be a religion presently that sits in Rome who's very powerful, not only religiously powerful, but politically powerful. I believe that Roman Catholicism will play a huge part in the coming religion of this world. If you look at commentaries on the end times, a lot of them will suggest that perhaps it will be a pope who will be the false prophet in the end times. I'll give you a slight twist on that, but one of the reasons that they draw that conclusion is, again, because of the description. And because going back in history, there was a big deal, you know, when it came to the Church of Jesus Christ and Roman Catholicism and some conflict. Now, let me just give you a disclaimer before you get offended. I need to make this very, very clear. This is in no way attacking your Catholic friends and family. That is not what this is about. It is very likely that your Catholic friends and family have never heard the things that I'm about to talk to you. And I know Catholics who understand the grace of God and know Jesus Christ as their own personal Savior. So this isn't an attack on them, but this is just to help you understand. And here's where things get weird, and truth is stranger than fiction. And again, if you choose not to believe these things, it will not have a great impact upon your faith. It may have a little impact on what you think of me, but that is a risk that I'm willing to take because there are people here that I believe would want to know these things. So going back in the Old Testament, the Tower of Babel, there was a union of church and state. Well, it just so happens in 312 AD, When Constantine was the Roman emperor, we once again find that union where he declared that Christianity, Catholicism, would now be the state religion. Up until that time, paganism had operated very publicly, out in the open. When this got nationalized, things changed a good bit. Now, the interesting thing about Constantine was that he claimed to be a Christian, but at the very same time he claimed to be a Christian, he was also actively a sun worshiper. We know this from history. But his mother Helena had a great influence on him when it came to Christianity, so he made this the religion. He didn't force it upon the people, but what he did is he offered great incentive. If you are a religious leader of the Christian church, the Catholic Church, then you will have the great perks. And so people were pouring into the Christian church. And here is where paganism went into the shadows, went into hiding within the church itself. What they essentially did is they rebranded paganism. The worship of many gods became the veneration of the saints and angels to whom they pray. They replaced pagan feasts with Christian celebrations. For instance, let me give you an example. Lent. Have you ever even questioned, what is Lent all about that leads us up to the resurrection? 40 days leading up to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Time of deprivation. Well, you won't find it in the Bible. You won't find it in the lives of the apostles. In fact, you won't find it until around the time of Constantine, where there was a shift from that paganism to Christianity, where they brought many of their pagan things into the church, one of which was the 40-day mourning of Semiramis. For 40 days, just leading up to the resurrection. And what do we call the resurrection? Easter. What is Easter? It's Ishtar. It's the same word. Who is Ishtar? That's Semiramis. I don't like to call it Easter. I will, because everyone knows what I'm talking about. I like to call it Resurrection Sunday. It's something we definitely should celebrate as God's people. But Lent, that's just a carryover from paganism. They embraced the use of statues in their worship. And here's what's happened in the empire. Essentially, they were going through the empire and they were just relabeling their statues. They had the mother-child religion. And so you've got statues of Semiramis and Tammuz. All you have to do is change the name. It's Mary and Jesus. And that's what they did. The mother-child religion is pagan. Mary represented as the mother of God. Remember, Semiramis was the mother of Nimrod, God, as well as his wife. Therefore, she was the mother of God as well as the queen of heaven. And so those are titles that have been attached to Mary. There are many other pagan symbols. I don't have time to get into them, but it took about 1,000 years before the eyes of some who were Christians were opened and realized that this is wrong. And guys like Luther and others led the Reformation. They became Protestants. What is a Protestant? It is a protestant. They're protesting the false religion, false gospel of Catholicism. Now, the Roman Church, in its attempt to regain its grip, it implemented a counter-revolution. They created an entirely new order within the Catholic Church called the Society of Jesus. We simply call them the Jesuits. The Jesuits are the military arm of the Catholic Church. Their design was to crush the Reformation. They were given the responsibility to infiltrate churches and governments and to bring the world back under the head of the papacy. That was their mission. And they were allowed to use subversive tactics, whatever it took, to make that happen. So what happens in the end times when you have this persecution against the saints, those who are saved during that time, it's really already happened in history. Millions, tens of millions of Protestants were murdered by the Catholic Church with the sword of the Jesuit order. Now, the Jesuits, as I mentioned, are not only religiously active, they are politically active as well. So much so that this order has been expelled from 83 different countries in recent centuries. 83, for meddling in the political affairs of those nations. It got so bad that in 1773 that Pope Clement disbanded the order of the Jesuits and claimed that they are too independent, leftist, and political. Those are his words, not mine. So here's what the Jesuits did. They got kicked out of countries. They came back into the countries and they infiltrated many of the secret societies of those countries. They started some of their own. You've probably heard of Freemasonry. They were working through the shadows, hand in glove. And the significance of those secret societies, they continued on the mystery religion, the paganism, that goes all the way back to Babel, the secret knowledge. And they do it more openly, of course, behind the scenes, but openly among themselves, because there's no direct attachment to the church. These mystery religions are continuing behind the scenes. Many of us don't even realize. Some of you are probably saying, well, Freemasons, that's just a boys' club. That's all that is. And maybe in the lower levels, it's true. Guys get together, they do things. Even sometimes in the name of God, they do things. But it isn't until you get to the 32nd, 33rd degree that you realize who their God is. Albert Pike, who was the most prominent, perhaps, Freemason of time, at least in the United States, penned a letter and very clearly and openly stated that their God that they serve and worship as Freemasons is Lucifer. Openly said it many, many times. Again, I'm giving you quotes and I'm giving you historical facts that you can check on this. It sounds crazy. And it gets even crazier because I'm going to say a word as soon as I say it. Some of you might stand up and walk away. One of the other orders that was created in 1776, remember 1773, the Order of the Jesuits was disbanded. But in 1776, a Jesuit by the name of Adam Weishaupt started a new order called the Illuminati. He started it in Bavaria. I say that word and immediately you think, oh, no, not that word. That's, today it's just science fiction or whatever you want to call it. But no, it was an actual order. And as you'll see in a moment, it had great power in this nation and in other nations hundreds of years ago. Adam Weishaupt stated the goal of that order was for a new world order through the abolition of all ordered governments, the abolition of private property, the abolition of patriotism, the abolition of the family, and the creation of a world government. That was their goal. And through these societies like the Illuminati, the Jesuits continued to exert their control. For instance, the French Revolution. You can look this up. This isn't a wild claim, but during the French Revolution, the Jesuits and the Illuminati were instrumental in causing that revolution. Napoleon kidnapped the sitting pope, and the terms of his release was you have to reinstate the Jesuits, the Order of the Jesuits, which they did in 1814. Napoleon, by the way, was Freemason. At the founding of this nation, remember what I said, wherever God is doing a work, Satan is doing a work. You agreed with me on that. Well, this nation is built upon many Christian principles. It's a great thing that God did, and yet while that was happening, Satan was he was working behind the scenes. George Washington said, these are quotes from him. If you don't believe me, you might believe this man. He said, all Freemasonry should be disbanded in America because our organization has been infiltrated by the Illuminati, and they have a bad intention for America and the world. He also said that it is my opinion that if the liberties of this country are destroyed, it will be this Roman Catholic Jesuit priests, for they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to the civil and religious liberty. They have instigated most of the wars of Europe. That's George Washington. And I'm going somewhere with this, please. Just hang with me. Have you ever noticed Washington, D.C. was built in large part by Freemasons? They designed it, they built it. Have you ever noticed, and if you weren't looking for it, maybe you didn't, but have you noticed how much paganism, how much symbology there is in Washington, D.C.? Let me give you the most obvious. The Washington Monument. You know that big, tall thing? What do you think that is? Symbol of strength? Symbol of our power? No, it's an obelisk is what it is. It's a phallic symbol that goes back to the Tower of Babel. There's an aspect of the story I didn't share with you because I can't share it with presence of kids that has to do with Nimrod and his wife, this fertility cult which ultimately worshipped a phallic symbol. And the obelisk was that symbol. Now, just as an interesting side note, if you were to visit the Vatican and you went into St. Peter's Square, what are you going to find? 40-foot tall obelisk. And guess where they got it? They got it from Egypt. It's a 4,000-year-old obelisk that they brought to the Vatican, and they set it there where it had previously been in Egypt, used in the worship of Ra, the sun god, who is Nimrod. Abraham Lincoln spoke of the Jesuits. He said, the Civil War, would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. Abraham Lincoln feared for his life, or recorded conversations with friends that he was fearing assassination from that order. Now, I don't know who killed him, but I'm just saying that that's what he said. And it is interesting that right after his assassination, Congress ended its diplomatic relations with the Vatican. Another interesting fact, they weren't reinstated until just shortly after the attempted assassination of Reagan. Well, since then, the infiltration of those like the Jesuits has been much more subtle. Do you know we have more Jesuit schools, universities, and high schools than anywhere else in the world in this country? Georgetown, Fordham, Boston College, the list goes on. And guess who gets trained in these colleges? Many of our political leaders. What do they learn in these colleges? They learn globalism. They learn New World Order stuff. I can give you a lot of examples. I'll just give you one. Henry Kissinger. Some of you go back a ways. You'll probably remember when this rhetoric started coming up. New World Order, New World Order. It was Henry Kissinger. And I could tell you a lot more, but I'm not going to, because you're probably not ready to hear it. The simple fact is that there's been an education and indoctrination that sometimes runs up to the highest levels. And that's where this New World Order comes from. And have you noticed that we're hearing it more now? It's coming up all the time. I'll close by talking about just two kind of international bodies. The UN, for one. Of course, the United Nations, it speaks for itself. It's aiming towards a New World Order, 193 member nations. It's interesting to me, and I'm still researching this a little deeper, but there's a new website that has just popped up. Instead of UN.com, it's UNNWO.com. Try to find out, are they the ones that posted it? And I do know that they have linked to it, but I don't know that they are the authors behind it, but at the very least they endorsed it. If you pull up that website, it says, let's take back our planet, or let's take our planet back. And here's the thing about the agenda of the UN is that it's hidden in plain sight. In other words, you could know about their agenda. It's not a theory at all because they have legislation that lays out what their agenda is. How many of you have ever heard of Agenda 21? Just raise your hand. You know how long that's been around? Since 1992. And most of you don't even know what it is. I didn't know what it was. Agenda 21 is legislation they put out on the subject of sustainable development. Now, they planned on having this done by 2021, this 1992, and it was authored. Now they're saying it's Agenda 2030 because it looks like it'll be delayed some. But when you read this agenda, and I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, it doesn't matter. There are people who have a great love of this planet who are all about conservation and all about the quote sustainable development, who have read that legislation and they have written books on it. They have done documentaries on it, saying that if you read this, you'll understand that this will be the end of our nationalism and our individualism. This is on both sides. This is a horrible piece of legislation which essentially does this. Calls for the drastic reduction of population. Take you back to the days of Noah. What did God say? Be fruitful and multiply, spread over the face of the earth. When has God rescinded that? Has he? Population control. Talk about the redistribution of wealth. It's a very socialistic plan that it lays out. The government takes control of all land use. So remember I mentioned earlier the abolition of private property. Oh, you can live there, but you have no say on what happens on that piece of land. And actually what their plan is, according to Agenda 21, is to get everybody out of the rural areas and bring them all into the cities. Does it sound like the Tower of Babel to you? Let's take everybody who's spread out and let's bring everybody together. And of course, that gives them greater control over the population. And ultimately, it outlines that they have the power of all land resources, education, food, energy. And guess who is one of the greatest proponents of this bill? The Pope, who just happens to be a Jesuit. That flew under the radar, but when he became Pope, that was never supposed to happen. The Jesuits are not supposed to have a Pope. Do you know why? Because they already have a Pope. The Jesuit order, the Supreme General of the Society of Jesus, is referred to as the Black Pope because of the black garb that he wears. The regular Pope wears white, he wears black. Back in the days of Reformation is when they started calling the head of the Jesuit order the Black Pope, and it just stuck, so they've used it throughout history. And many have said that the Black Pope has more authority than the regular Pope. Whether that's true, I know it's based on the testimony of some who have defected from the Jesuit order, and one man in particular who is a born-again Christian who says that this is true. He worked in the Vatican for 7 years and said, no, the Black Pope is the one who tells the regular Pope what to do. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just telling you that. Is it possible that the false prophet would not be the regular Pope, but perhaps the Black Pope? I don't know. I don't know with 100% certainty who the false prophet will be. But I find it interesting that our present Pope, or the Pope, he's speaking at these UN conferences on the subject of sustainable development and pushing for this to go through, all of that program. Since the power is going to be consolidated in the East there in Europe, let me just focus real quick before I close on the European Union. The European Union is also aiming at a new world order, a totalitarian form of secular humanism. The European Union has a very close tie to the Catholic Church. I don't have time to get into all this. I wish I did, but have you ever seen the flag of the European Union? It's a blue flag with 12 stars in a circle. Well, that color blue is the blue of Mary from the Catholic Church, and the 12 stars goes to Revelation 12, where it talks about the woman with the 12 stars over her head. The Catholic Church thinks that's Mary. We would interpret that as Israel. But you've often seen pictures of Mary where she is painted with 12 stars and a halo over her head that references Revelation 12. Well, that's their flag, the Mary color with the 12 stars. The European Union is attempting, and they've been very vocal about this, kind of reinstating a Holy Roman Empire. Now, I know it's been weakened some with Brexit, and the truth is, in its present form, it couldn't be the political authority of the end times, because that has to be reduced down to 10 primary players, and I know there are more than that in the European Union. But this is interesting. If you were to ever go to the Parliament building in Brussels for the European Union, it is the Tower of Babel. That's how they build it. There's an old painting by a man named Bruegel where he painted the Tower of Babel, and they patterned their Parliament building around that picture. It looks like a tower that's been constructed and is not complete. And of course, they aim to complete what was started there in the Old Testament. If you were to take a tour through the Parliament building, they would tell you as you're touring it that this is patterned after the Tower of Babel. They have the euro. You ever seen some of the euro coins? What do you see on the euro? The woman riding the beast? The woman on the bull? You know who that woman is? It's Europa. It's where Europe gets its name. So you say, well, that makes sense, right? Who is Europa? Europa is the Phoenician goddess, another name for Semiramis. Who is the bull that she's riding upon? It's a white bull. If you know the story, the mythology, that this bull was sweet and kind. She got on its back. It whisked her away to an island where it resumed its actual form, and it turned out it was Zeus. And he forced himself upon her. And that's the story behind that. So the white bull is Zeus. Guess who Zeus is? Zeus is another name for Baal or Nimrod. And you want to hear the slogan of the European Union? Many languages, one voice. What happened at the Tower of Babel? God divided the languages, spread out humanity. And it's almost like a slap in the face to God to say, yes, we have many languages, but we've overcome it, and we're coming back together with one voice, and it is a voice of defiance towards God. I told you some of you aren't going to believe it. I told you some of you won't like it. And I hope you come back next week. Please understand, if you're new here, this is not how I typically preach. This is different, okay? I don't do this often. I'm not going to do it like this. I just felt that this is something that I should show you, that there is a thread, a common thread that runs through history. It's a seamless thread that runs from the Tower of Babel to Babylon of the end times. And that even now, there exists, the things that happen in Babel are still happening, but they're happening behind the scenes, places that you don't see. And I understand a message like this is more for the enlightenment of the mind than it is for the edification of the soul. This isn't very uplifting. They were supposed to have communion this week, and I called Barbara a couple days ago. I said, Barbara, please, I forgot it was Communion Sunday. Please don't have it this week. This message is not a good communion message. This is dark stuff. It's disturbing. You know that I spent a good bit of this week debating whether to give this message. I thought, look, this is going to disturb people. Thursday night, I came to the conclusion that maybe that's okay. Maybe we need to experience a little bit of discomfort, because here's the thing. We have been blessed to grow up in a modern age where Satanism and paganism are very covert. You see the kind of the symptoms of it, but you don't see that stuff clearly and plainly with your eyes. And that is unlike most times in the world's history. When you go back to the Old Testament, Israel's dealing with paganism openly. They're battling darkness. When you go to the days of Jesus, he and his disciples, the apostles, dealt openly with demonic possession and all kinds of paganism. It was very overt in their society, and we haven't dealt with that. But the disadvantage of not having to deal with it openly is that many of us are ignorant of Satan's devices, which the Bible says we shouldn't be. We're ignorant of what he's doing. We don't know the enemy that we're fighting. And all this talk of infiltration, I'll just close by saying that I'll remind you of something Jesus said. He said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That we as the church of Jesus Christ, our goal is not simply let's hold off the invasion of all this darkness, but rather we're the ones who are called to be the invaders. It says the gates of hell will not prevail. The gates are a defensive tool, a defensive weapon. You don't battle people with gates. You try to hold them off. And what Jesus is saying, that you as my people are the ones who are going to infiltrate the darkness of Satan's kingdom, bringing the light of the gospel. That is our job. And it greatly helps us to understand what we're going into. Will it dramatically impact your faith if you don't choose to believe anything that I told you today? Well, probably not. But I do think it affects your worldview. It's kind of like buying a puzzle at the store. You got the puzzle the top of the box. It shows you the picture of what the puzzle will look like once it's done. That's prophecy. That's revelation. God has given us the picture of where this is all heading. And the reason that helps you is because you come across these puzzle pieces through life, all these circumstances, political events, and it's very helpful. When you've seen the big picture, you can say, I see that piece, but I think it connects over here. It goes with this piece. And it helps you with your worldview to place the pieces in their appropriate location. Well, next week, I'm going to show you from Psalm chapter 83 and Ezekiel chapter 38, two wars that are yet to be fought, which is believed to be fought just prior to the period of tribulation. And it's amazing to see how the puzzle pieces are starting to come together for the fulfillment of Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38. Father, I am thankful to be here this morning, and I know that this is a heavy message, and for myself to even delve back into these topics, which I haven't done for quite some time. I know, Lord, that it's dark, and I know it's disturbing, but I know that we also need to know our enemy. We need to know what's happening and how this movement of history, this kingdom of darkness that Satan is trying to build, it's real and it's out there. And sometimes it's even hidden in plain sight. We see the evidence of it, but we just don't know what to look for. We don't know what we're looking at. And so help us, Father, as a people to be more aware, with our eyes open, to see what's happening around us, Lord. There's so many lies that are being told to us, and we just need the clarity of spiritual vision. Lord, we pray that you would help us with that. And if there's anyone here today, Father, who doesn't know Jesus as their Savior, the disturbing nature of these things is enhanced by the fact that they don't necessarily have the hope that we have as your people. Lord, I can deal with these dark things because I know that I'm a child of God and I live in the light of your presence, and I know that I will eternally live in the light of your presence. But there are people here today who don't have that hope, and if they don't, I pray that they would understand today that Jesus loved them. He loves them still. He went to the cross, died for their sins. He stood in their place, Father, bearing the punishment of a holy God so that he could offer the free gift of eternal salvation, a relationship with himself. I pray today would be the day they find it by simply trusting that he died for their sins and rose again, believing only in him. And we ask it in his name. Amen. Well, thank you all for being here. Don't know how to judge by that silence throughout, whether that was awe or disgust or what that was, but I hope you come back next week because we'll continue this series, and I promise that it won't quite be so weird next week. So, well, Lord bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.